The world didn't end with a bang. It crumbled in silence, one city at a time. First came the broadcast outages. Then the power grid collapsed. And finally, the screams. By the time the truth reached the mountain town of Fairbridge, most of the world had already fallen. The infection wasn't just a virus, it was a transformation. People didn't die. They changed, twisted into things that hunted with instinct but moved with unsettling purpose. Kara Mason stood atop the broken roof of the school gymnasium, scanning the distance through a cracked pair of binoculars. Smoke still rose from what used to be the town square. The fire hadn't stopped since the first wave hit. That had been 11 days ago. Now, only 50 people remained. And each hour was a countdown. She dropped down from the rooftop as Sergeant Caleb Vaughn approached, his steps heavy with exhaustion. His uniform was torn, his face lined with dirt and blood. He was one of the last trained soldiers left in this region, and even he looked one mistake away from collapse. They took the southern wall, he said. A small group of them. Fast. Smarter than the others. Kara nodded grimly. How many did we lose? 3. He hesitated. One of them was Marcus. Her stomach twisted. Marcus had helped build the barricades. He taught the kids how to use a crossbow. He gave hope when no one else could. And now he was gone. They're testing us, Kara muttered. They're not just wandering. They're learning. Caleb didn't argue. He didn't need to. Everyone had seen it. The infected had once been mindless, dragging themselves through the streets like broken dolls. Now they moved in groups. They circled. They stalked. They waited for mistakes. Inside the makeshift shelter, a reinforced high school gym, families huddled close. A generator hummed faintly, running off scavenged fuel. The walls were lined with crates, food, water, ammo. Everything rationed to the last drop. Children whispered in the corners, eyes too old for their age. No one laughed anymore. As Kara entered, a murmur spread. Did we lose the wall? Are they closer? Is it over? She raised her hand, quieting them. We're holding. We've survived 11 days. We'll survive 12. A boy, maybe 10, asked, how do we know it's not just us left? Kara knelt beside him, her voice steady. We don't. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. A voice called out from the back. We should leave. Go to the mountains. Disappear. But Caleb stepped forward. And what then? Freeze in the woods? Starve? Get picked off one by one? We fight, Kara said. This school is a fortress. We reinforce it. We adapt. The room went quiet again, the fragile kind of silence built on fear. Later that night, Kara joined the watch team at the northern perimeter. Lights flickered as the generator wavered. She watched the tree lean. Nothing moved. But something felt wrong. Suddenly, a shriek tore through the night, not from the outside, but inside the gym. Kara spun. Caleb's voice roared from the hallway. Everyone, down. One got in. How? She raced back inside. Chaos reigned. People scattered. Blood smeared the walls near the rear entrance. One of the survivors, a woman named Rita, was on the ground, screaming. Her leg had been bitten. 2 others held her down as she writhed. It got her, someone shouted. She'll turn. We don't know that. Kara snapped. But they did. They all knew. Caleb arrived with 2 others. Secure her in the science lab. We need to study how fast it spreads. We need answers, not guesses. Rita was dragged away, pleading for mercy. Some turned their eyes. Some prayed. Kara stood over the broken door in the back. It hadn't been smashed open. It had been unlocked. Someone let it in, she whispered. Caleb's face darkened. You think there's a traitor? I think there's a spy. Maybe infected, maybe human. But someone's trying to break us from the inside. The idea was more terrifying than the creatures outside. Because that meant trust was now a weapon. And it had been used. The next morning, the 50 survivors gathered in silence. Rita had turned in the night. She attacked her captors. 3 more were injured before she was put down. The numbers were now 46. Kara stood before them. This wasn't just a random attack. Someone among us is giving them information. Weakening our defenses. Unlocking doors. Eyes darted across the room. No one spoke. But everyone suspected. We're not just surviving anymore, she continued. We're resisting. And that means finding out who's helping the enemy, before they open another door. And so began the true war, not just against the undead. But against betrayal within. The sun rose over Fairbridge, but it brought no comfort. A crimson hue bathed the school's walls, streaked with ash and dried blood. Of the original 50 survivors, only 46 remained, and now, worse than the dwindling numbers, came the invisible threat hiding in plain sight, a traitor among them. Kara paced the length of the gym, every step echoing like a clock ticking down to another disaster. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed, rifle slung across his chest. His jaw clenched tighter with every passing moment. We have to find who opened that back door, Kara said. No one's safe if we don't. And if we're wrong? Caleb asked. If it wasn't betrayal, but panic? She paused. Then we still fix the security. But my gut says this wasn't a mistake. They gathered the survivors that morning in the cafeteria-turned-briefing room. Everyone sat, tense, guarded. Faces once filled with hope were now carved by suspicion. Kara stepped forward. This isn't a trial. No one's being blamed. But someone here either made a deadly mistake, or is working against us. Murmurs rippled through the room. Lena, the quiet teenager who had been helping in the kitchen, raised her hand. Can't we check the cameras? Amara, their tech specialist, shook her head. They were routed through the east wing panel. That section got fried when the generator overloaded last week. We only have partial recordings. Raoul, a gruff mechanic with scars to match his temper, stood up. Then let's search bags. Pockets. If someone's signaling those things, they have to be carrying something. Let's not turn this into a witch hunt, Kara warned. We do this carefully. Respectfully. Caleb stepped forward. We'll divide into teams. One watches the perimeter. One searches the interior. No one's alone. No one's above suspicion. By noon, the search began. Lena worked with Amara to sort through inventory. They combed through medical kits, supply crates, personal belongings, anything that could hide a radio or signaling device. Down in the basement, Raoul and Caleb swept the storage tunnels. Old lockers. Disused classrooms. Nothing obvious. But in the locker room, they found something. A trail of muddy boot prints, leading to a locked supply closet. Caleb knocked. No answer. He turned the handle. Locked. Raoul stepped back, raised a pry bar, and smashed it open. Inside was a stash, food, fuel cans, a flare gun, and a blood-stained shirt, one that matched the uniform Marcus had worn the night he died. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Someone was hiding this. Preparing to run, or waiting for something. Raoul looked furious. You think someone lured Marcus out? Sacrificed him? Kara arrived moments later. Her eyes locked onto the flare gun. That's how they're signaling, she whispered. That's how the undead knew exactly when to attack. She turned to the group. We're dealing with someone smart. Patient. And they're still among us. That night, tension reached a boiling point. The survivors no longer looked at each other the same way. Conversations were short. Eyes avoided contact. No one wanted to accuse, but no one trusted either. Mira, the mute scout who communicated only through gestures, approached Kara with urgency. She signed rapidly, drawing a rough diagram in the dust. North Tower, movement, alone. Someone sneaking out again? Kara asked. Mira nodded. Get Caleb. We follow quietly. The three moved into the night, using the narrow service halls to climb to the roof access. There, beyond the makeshift barricade, they spotted movement. A figure, cloaked in a dark poncho, raising something into the air. A flare gun. Kara's heart froze. Before the figure could fire, Caleb stepped forward with his weapon raised. Drop it. Now. The figure turned, startled, and dropped the flare, which clattered across the floor. It was Deacon. A former security guard, quiet, trusted. He had helped train the children, kept night watch, and always volunteered for perimeter duty. Kara stepped forward. Why, Deacon? He didn't answer at first. Then his voice cracked. Because we're doomed. We've been doomed since day one. They promised safety if I cooperated. They promised they'd let me live. They? Caleb asked sharply. The infected, Deacon said, eyes wild. Not the mindless ones. The others. The ones that think. They've changed. They're organizing. Talking through radios. Negotiating with survivors like me. You're lying, Raoul growled, stepping from the stairwell. No. Deacon yelled. I've heard them. They know who's hiding, who's armed. They said they'd leave me alone if I helped. Kara stared at him, a man who had once risked his life for a stranger, now bargaining with monsters. You gave them Marcus, she said. Deacon flinched. I didn't mean to. He followed me. There was no trial. No debate. They locked Deacon in the boiler room, alone, unarmed. Kara couldn't kill him. Not yet. But he would never be free again. Later, Caleb spoke quietly to Kara. If they really are communicating, if there's some intelligence behind this, then we're not just fighting the infected, she said. We're fighting something worse. Resistance had begun. But so had the mind games. They didn't sleep that night. After Deacon's betrayal, the fragile bond between the remaining 46 survivors had begun to splinter. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who else had made a deal? What else weren't they being told? Kara knew if she didn't regain control soon, they'd turn on each other faster than the undead ever could. At dawn, the sky was a dull gray, blanketed with ash and silence. Kara stood beside Caleb near the edge of the gym rooftop, surveying the horizon. No signs of movement. No signs of safety either. He said the infected were communicating, Kara muttered, tightening the strap on her gear. Organizing. What if he wasn't lying? Caleb didn't answer immediately. Even if they are, how do we fight something that thinks like us but doesn't die like us? Before she could respond, Mira arrived with urgent gestures. She drew a symbol, stairs, arrows, then tapped her chest, Scout's shorthand for something's under us. What did you find? Kara asked. Mira grabbed a map and pointed to a section of the school basement, a section sealed after the infection spread. It had once been part of the old maintenance tunnels. Mira had slipped in during a patrol and heard noises. You think they've breached it? Caleb asked. Mira shook her head, then scribbled a word on a pad, human voices. Let's go, Kara said. The air grew colder as they descended. The power cables ended halfway down the stairwell, plunging the bottom floors into darkness. They moved in silence, guided only by flashlight beams and the echo of their footsteps. The door to the sealed tunnel was slightly ajar. Kara motioned for quiet. She raised her sidearm and eased the door open further. Inside was a scene they hadn't expected. Candlelight flickered across rusted metal pipes and broken crates. A small camp had been set up, food wrappers, old bedding, even books. Someone had been living down here. And then, voices. Faint. Two people, arguing behind a curtain hung over a doorway deeper into the tunnel. Kara crept forward and pulled it aside. Two men spun in shock. One was Gavin, a teenager who had gone missing days ago and was presumed dead. The other was a stranger. Dark-haired, tall, hollow-eyed, dressed in military fatigues, but ones they didn't recognize. "Don't move!" Caleb shouted, weapon raised. The stranger didn't reach for a weapon. He simply raised his hands. "I'm not infected. And if you kill me, you'll never know what's coming." Kara stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" "Lieutenant Mason Hall," he said. U.S. Recon Unit 17. "We were part of an operation to contain the outbreak, until our own base was overrun. I escaped through the underground tunnel system. Found your boy here 3 nights ago." Gavin nodded quickly. "He saved me. Why didn't you come to the surface?" Kara asked. Hall's voice turned cold. "Because I've seen what's coming. And it's not just a swarm of the undead." He led them deeper into the tunnel, past rusted lockers and burst pipes, to a hidden steel door that had been jammed halfway open. On the other side, darkness and rot choked the air, but there were signs of recent movement. Footprints. Scratches. Blood trails. "This tunnel connects to a larger network," Hall explained. "It runs beneath several towns. Originally designed for military transport. But now, they use it." "They?" Caleb asked. Hall looked him dead in the eye. "The evolved infected. The ones Deacon tried to describe. They've been gathering. Coordinating. Building nests. And they're no longer just eating people." He knelt and pulled back a tarp, revealing rows of recording equipment. Radios. Maps. Surveillance notes. Kara stared. "You were tracking them." "Until they found us," Hall said. "I lost my team one by one. Now I stay hidden." "You need to come topside," Kara said. "We need this intel." Hall hesitated. "If they see me with you, they'll come faster. They'll send their leaders. You have no idea what they're capable of." "We'll reinforce," Caleb said firmly. "We don't hide. We fight." Hall studied him for a long moment, then nodded. They brought Hall and Gavin back to the gym as the sun dipped below the ash-colored sky. Survivors gathered around, listening in disbelief as he laid out the truth. "There's a growing nest to the east," he said. "And they've converted part of the old rail system into a hive. They're breeding, changing, spreading spores that alter the living. The bite isn't the only danger anymore." A silence fell over the room. "Then what do we do?" Lena asked. "If they're underground, if they're smarter." "We become smarter," Kara said. "We prepare for them underground and above. We don't just survive. We resist," Caleb added. The final 46 survivors were no longer just survivors. They were now soldiers in a hidden war. But below their feet, in the tunnels, the dead were already moving. And they weren't alone. The air below ground felt heavier. Every breath Kara took inside the tunnel system tasted like rust, mold, and something else, something unnatural. It had been 3 days since Lieutenant Hall joined the survivors and revealed the truth: the evolved infected weren't mindless anymore. They were organizing, spreading, preparing. Now, Kara, Caleb, Mira, and Hall stood at the entrance to the rail tunnels that lay beneath Fairbridge. Behind them, the rest of the survivors worked tirelessly to reinforce the school, fortify the windows, and prepare escape routes. But Kara needed to see the truth with her own eyes. They moved cautiously through the first 100 meters. Mira, always alert, signed when she spotted tracks, bare feet, large, smeared with dark grime. They were here, Caleb whispered. Recently. Hall knelt beside a wall, brushing away ash and soot to reveal strange markings, lines and curves that looked almost mathematical. They use symbols to guide their own, he said. Some of them have memory. Intelligence. Kara frowned. Are we sure these aren't just scavenger graffiti? No, Hall said. I watched them write it. They pushed deeper, passing rusted subway rails and collapsed corridors. At one junction, they paused. Mira stiffened. She pointed to the ceiling. A camera, not working, just hanging. But a crude effigy had been placed below it. A pile of bones, arranged like a warning sign. Atop it, a child's doll with its head removed. They're sending messages now, Caleb muttered. And then, the humming began. Low at first. Like the hum of wind through a broken pipe. But soon, it became rhythmic, almost like a chant. Kara held her breath. What is that? Hall whispered, it's them. You need to see it yourself. They arrived at a breach in the concrete, an old maintenance shaft widened by force. Inside, the rail system opened into what looked like a forgotten underground station. But it had been transformed. Dozens of infected moved below in jerky patterns. But they weren't attacking. They weren't snarling. They were building. Using debris, metal, bone, and wire, they'd constructed crude barricades and nests. And walking among them, taller figures in dark, tattered coats, were leaders. Their skin was gray but their eyes were sharp, scanning. One of them lifted a clawed hand and hissed a command, and the crowd moved in unison. They obey him, Hall said. That one's a prime. He was probably turned during the first week, military, maybe. But now, he leads them. Kara watched, heart pounding. So this is their hive? No, Hall replied. This is just a forward camp. The hive's still further out, beneath the old steel factory 2 miles from here. That's where they breed. Where they experiment. Experiment? Caleb asked, jaw clenched. Hall nodded grimly. I saw one of them turn a human who hadn't been bitten. Just injected with something. A black fluid. Kara whispered, this changes everything. We can't just fight them with guns anymore, Caleb said. This is war, but not the kind we're trained for. Suddenly, Mira tapped Kara's shoulder and pointed. A group of infected were heading their way, 4 of them, sniffing the air, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. We've been scented, Hall said. They turned and moved quickly, silent as shadows. But one of the evolved shrieked, a high-pitched alarm. The tunnel behind them exploded in noise. The hunt had begun. They ran, dodging fallen support beams and leaping over flooded tracks. Behind them, the screeches echoed louder and louder, gaining. Kara slipped and scraped her leg, blood mixing with grime. Caleb grabbed her arm and hauled her up. No time, he shouted. Mira fired a flare down the tunnel behind them, the sudden burst of red light blinding the infected momentarily. Hall tossed a homemade grenade. The boom shook the tunnel. They reached a service ladder and climbed like their lives depended on it, because they did. As they emerged into the boiler room beneath the school, they sealed the hatch and collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. They're coming, Hall said between gasps. Not just a horde. A strike force. They've marked us. We have maybe a day, Kara whispered. Maybe less. That night, the survivors gathered. Kara stood before them, leg bandaged, blood-stained but determined. They know where we are. They're not just hunting anymore, they're planning. And if we wait, they'll surround us and burn this place to the ground. We can't run, Amara said. Not with the kids. Not with the supplies. We won't run, Kara replied. We fight. We trap them. We use the tunnels against them. Caleb stepped forward. We create kill zones. We use flame. Gas. Anything. If this is war, then we fight like soldiers. Hall added, and we take one of their leaders alive. We need to understand how they think, before it's too late. Silence. Then Raoul stood. Let's end this. A cheer rose from the survivors, not of joy, but of grim resolve. They weren't prey anymore. They were the resistance. And tomorrow, the dead would learn what it meant to face humans with nothing left to lose. Every hallway was rigged. Every doorway booby-trapped. Inside the school's underground boiler room, the remaining survivors, now just 44, finished the final preparations for the trap. They'd turned the labyrinth of tunnels into a killing field. Crude flamethrowers built from propane tanks. Tripwire-triggered explosives made with scavenged materials. And above all, a plan built on one gamble, that the infected were smart enough to chase them, and arrogant enough not to expect what waited. Kara stood near the entrance to the lower tunnels, checking the detonator Hall had built from a salvaged circuit board. Her eyes flicked toward the group prepping for the descent. Everyone clear on the extraction points? Caleb nodded. Team Alpha will draw them down. Bravo seals them in. Once the Prime enters the ambush zone, we collapse the tunnel. Mira tapped her wrist. One word, time. They moved. Inside the tunnel, the silence wasn't comforting, it was unnatural. Not even the usual drips of leaking pipes or wind brushing past the support beams. The infected had grown quiet. They're waiting, Hall whispered. Caleb scanned the shadows. They know we're coming. That's fine, Kara said grimly. So do we. 30 minutes in, they reached the forward hive. Empty. The nests, once alive with movement, were deserted. Not a single infected remained. Mira crouched low, running a hand over the stone. Still warm. Recently used. And then they saw it, scrawled on the wall in a streak of something dark and crusted. We learn. Kara's spine stiffened. They knew this was a trap. Worse, Hall said, voice hard. They laid one of their own. A screech tore through the air. Lights flickered. Behind them, shadows moved in the tunnel. Fast. Dozens. The team spun, weapons raised. Kara shouted, fall back. Phase 2. They sprinted for the fallback position, tripping wires behind them, setting off blasts that shook the concrete and lit the darkness with fire. Screams echoed, not human. Not natural. Still, they came. Flesh burned, bones shattered, but the evolved infected surged forward with single-minded focus. Caleb tossed a chemical flare, illuminating the tunnel in ghastly green light. And then, through the smoke, he appeared. 7 feet tall. Cloaked in remnants of riot gear. His jaw unhinged slightly as he screeched, flanked by smaller infected that moved with eerie coordination. The Prime. Kara froze. There he is. Hall raised a net cannon, one shot, homemade. We get him, we learn everything. Now. They triggered the ambush. The tunnel caved inward behind the Prime's group, trapping them in the corridor. Flame burst from the walls. Hall fired the net, it slammed into the Prime, pinning him to a support column. The other infected shrieked in response, but they couldn't reach him through the fire. They had him. For a moment, they won. Back inside the gym basement, the Prime was strapped down with chains and reinforced cables. His eyes, milky white and ringed with black veins, twitched as he scanned the room. But he didn't snarl. Didn't bite. He watched. Kara stood over him. You understand me? The Prime tilted his head slightly. His throat pulsed once, then, in a broken, rasping voice, he answered. More than you, understand yourself. Everyone froze. It could speak. Hall stepped forward, recorder in hand. You're not mindless. You're evolving. The Prime blinked slowly. Not evolving. Replacing. Kara narrowed her eyes. Replacing what? Your failure. Your war. Your species. The room fell into stunned silence. Why kill us? Caleb asked. Why wipe out everything? You poisoned the sky, the Prime hissed. Built walls between yourselves. We are unity. One mind. One future. Kara leaned in close. You're still rotting flesh. You're still dying. But we will not stop, he rasped. Others come. Stronger. Already beneath. Already, inside. Hall grabbed Kara's arm. We need to extract everything we can. This is our edge. But just then, alarms blared from the upper floors. Mira rushed in with a look of horror. They had breached the surface. Smoke rose above the gymnasium as Kara and the team scrambled outside. Fire. Screams. Chaos. Dozens of infected, some they hadn't seen before, had emerged from manholes and sewer grates around the building. Smaller, faster creatures with 4 limbs sprinted like wild dogs. Others dropped down from rooftops. The Hive had sent more than a retaliation. They'd sent a message. This wasn't random, Hall shouted as he fired. They waited for the Prime to distract us. Caleb pulled 2 teens to safety as Mira sniped from a rooftop, keeping the fastest ones at bay. We hold here. Kara ordered. Protect the infirmary and the children. Push them back. For an hour, the survivors fought tooth and nail. By dawn, the infected began retreating, no longer frenzied, but disciplined. As the last of them disappeared into the tunnels, a final warning echoed from the shadows. We are many. You are 50. And your time ends soon. Later that morning, standing amidst charred bodies and blood-soaked ground, Kara knew the truth. They had won the battle. But the war was only just beginning. The air was thick with smoke and sorrow. Sunlight broke over the shattered remains of the school. Burned walls, blood-stained floors, and the haunting silence of those who had fallen. Of the 50 who once stood together, only 38 remained. Kara stood over a row of bodies wrapped in tarp. Her jaw was tight, hands stained from dragging the fallen out of the wreckage. Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder but said nothing. Words were useless now. Hall and Mira approached from the holding cell below. Hall's expression was grim. The Prime is gone. Kara turned sharply. What do you mean gone? He chewed through his restraints, snapped his own jaw, dislocated both shoulders, escaped through a storm drain under the foundation. Caleb swore under his breath. We had him. He spoke to us. Which means he knew more than we imagined, Mira signed. And now he's taking that knowledge back to the Hive. Kara didn't blink. Then we prepare. No more waiting. No more defense. We take the fight to them. But as preparations for the offensive began, something else was happening. something quieter, more dangerous. Amara, one of the food runners, collapsed during breakfast. She clutched her stomach, eyes wild, veins darkening around her temples. The infirmary filled within seconds. Hall checked her vitals, frowning. No bites. No scratches. No signs of contact. But Mira pointed at a small injection mark behind her ear, barely visible. Kara's heart sank. She was injected. Like the Prime had described. Within minutes, Amara began to change. Her eyes turned milky white, her voice reduced to growls and whispers. But she wasn't fully lost. Not yet. She stared at Kara and murmured, "They're in me." Hall restrained her while Mira administered a strong sedative. Caleb watched, jaw clenched. "We've got to assume this is a new tactic," he said. "They're infecting without contact now." Kara nodded grimly. "They're turning us into them without even a fight." Later that night, while the survivors slept in shifts, Kara sat alone at the watch post. Her radio crackled softly, nothing but static. But then, a voice. Weak. Broken. "Anyone, alive?" She straightened, twisting the dial. "This is Kara, Resistance Group Echo 4, Fairbridge." "Who is this?" The voice returned, slightly stronger. "My name is Eli. I'm with a group of 7. We've been hiding near the quarry. We saw your signal fires." Kara looked to Hall and Mira, who had joined her after hearing the transmission. "They could be real," Hall said. "Or it could be bait." "They said 7, Mira signed. "That's not a horde. That's hope." Kara took a breath. "Send coordinates. We'll come for you." At dawn, the extraction team departed. Kara, Caleb, Mira, and Hall led the way, traveling on foot through the ash-coated outskirts of town. Every step outside their defenses felt heavier than the last. The quarry loomed ahead like a scar in the earth. At the base, a camp, tarped, hidden among rocks. And within it, 5 survivors stepped out cautiously. A woman clutched a child. A young man held a pipe. All were thin, pale, but alive. "I'm Eli," the man said, stepping forward. "You must be Kara." She nodded. "We're getting you out of here." But Mira suddenly raised her fist. Movement in the shadows. 2 more figures emerged, too slow. Too unnatural. Kara drew her weapon. "Stay back." Eli raised his hands. "They're not infected. Not fully. They were injected. Just like your girl." Hall scanned them with a handheld reader. The scanner buzzed faintly, contaminated, but not active. "They're in limbo," Hall muttered. "Between human and infected." Kara's thoughts raced. Can they still think? Still reason? Eli nodded. They dream. They feel. Caleb looked to her. We take them back, they could compromise everything. We leave them, Kara replied, and we're no better than the monsters we fight. After a tense pause, she gave the order. We bring them. Carefully. Back at the school, the survivors watched as the newcomers entered. Some embraced. Some stayed distant. But that night, something darker brewed. Mira approached Kara urgently. She showed her the footage from one of the hallway cameras, grainy, but clear enough. One of the new arrivals, the infected boy, stood over a supply cabinet. And as he opened it, he whispered into the air. To no one. Except, a few seconds later, outside the compound, a response whisper came from the trees. They're linked, Mira signed. Caleb whispered, he's a sleeper. Kara's blood turned cold. He's the enemy, inside the walls. Darkness had returned, but not from the night. It came from within. The infected sleeper, young, barely more than a boy, was sedated and locked inside a reinforced storage cell beneath the school gym. The others, including Eli, were being questioned one by one. But the damage was already done. "We don't know how many he talked to," Caleb said as he stood in the strategy room, staring at the map of the school's layout. "If there are more like him, more sleepers, then we're not a group of 38 survivors anymore. We're a nest waiting to explode." Kara nodded, arms crossed, the weight of leadership heavier than ever. "We don't kill kids. But we can't take chances. We need to run tests," Hall added, sliding blueprints across the table. "Track brain activity. Check for hive sync pulses. If there's even a flicker of connection to the prime or the swarm, we isolate them." Mira signed quickly. "But what if we find nothing? What if they've figured out how to hide it?" "Then we assume everyone's infected until proven otherwise," Kara said. "We stop trusting blindly." The war wasn't just outside anymore. It was now a war of suspicion. At dawn, the interrogations began. Eli sat in the old music room, surrounded by old, cracked instruments and broken glass. Kara faced him across a table, Mira behind her, calm but watching. "Why didn't you tell us?" Kara asked. "I didn't know," Eli said, voice raspy. "The boy, Danny, he started getting sick a few days ago. Fever, confusion, but no bite, no scratch. We thought it was just the stress." "You had to know something was off," Mira signed. Eli shook his head. "We were surviving in holes and caves. No food, no sleep. When people start whispering to shadows, you assume they're going crazy, not becoming something else." Myra's expression hardened. "He's lying." Kara leaned in. "If you're protecting them, you're putting all of us at risk." "I'm not," Eli said quickly. "But listen, Danny said something before you came. He said they were waking up underground. That something's coming. Bigger than anything we've seen." Kara's heart dropped. "He said," Eli continued, "the prime was just the first mind." By midday, a second problem emerged. Another of the newcomers, a woman named Raina, was found wandering the hallway at 3 a.m. She had no memory of leaving her bunk. Her pulse was irregular. Her eyes flickered between colors for a brief moment. She didn't resist when Mira and Hall brought her to the medical wing. She simply whispered, "I hear them dreaming." And then she collapsed into a coma. The survivors split into factions. Some, led by a former police officer named Torres, demanded all the newcomers be expelled, or killed. "They're time bombs." Torres shouted to Kara in the courtyard, voice echoing among the tense survivors. "We can't risk the last safe place on infected sympathies. And if one of us starts changing?" Kara replied coldly. "Do we start shooting our own?" Torres didn't answer. But the lines had been drawn. Fear had done what the infected never could, it broke the survivors from within. That night, as rain fell hard against the broken skylights, Hall stayed with Danny in the storage cell, monitoring his vitals. A thick wall of reinforced glass separated them. The boy twitched in his sleep. Then sat up. He looked straight at Hall, and smiled. "You built good walls," he whispered. "But you forgot the tunnels beneath." Alarms blared. Mira, stationed near the perimeter, rushed through the hallway, gun in hand. "We've got movement. Beneath the east wing." Kara grabbed her rifle. "They're coming from below." The floor beneath the gym trembled. A second later, explosions. Dust and concrete flew into the air. They were breaching from under the school. Dozens of evolved infected, small, nimble, gray-skinned, burst from a tunnel network long forgotten. They didn't shriek like the others. They moved in coordinated silence, bypassing traps, taking out power lines, disabling defenses. They're smarter now. Hall shouted. They learned from the Prime. The fight erupted in chaos. Flashbangs lit the dark hallways. Gunshots cracked against the walls. Survivors fought in every direction. Caleb pulled 2 wounded into the cafeteria. Kara fired from the rooftop, covering Torres, who despite their disagreement, fought like a savage to hold the front. They're heading for the medical wing. Mira signed furiously. No, Kara whispered. They're heading for the sleepers. Suddenly, Kara understood, this attack wasn't for them. It was a rescue mission. Inside the medical bay, Reyna and Danny's cots were empty. Chains shattered. Glass broken. Hall ran in, too late. A message was burned into the wall using heated metal. They returned to the one mind. The next wave wakes soon. Mira turned to Kara. We just lost our only chance to understand them. Kara looked out at the smoking hallways, the wounded, the dead. No longer 38. Now only 29. And as she gripped her rifle and faced the coming dawn, she whispered. Next time, we go underground first. The tunnels waited, silent, ancient, and breathing. 3 days had passed since the underground breach. Of the original 50 survivors, only 29 remained. The wounded were stabilized. The school was patched, reinforced, and left behind. Kara stood in the mouth of the sewer tunnel with her rifle slung over her shoulder and a torch in her hand. We can't wait anymore, she said. If they're waking something worse, we end it before it starts. Hall, Mira, Caleb, and Torres formed the core of the strike team. Each carried a weapon, a light, and a final purpose. The rest of the group, the civilians, the young, the injured, remained hidden in a backup location deep in the forest with orders, if we don't return, stay hidden. Never come back. The resistance was no longer waiting to survive. It was ready to finish the fight. The air grew colder with every step into the tunnels. Faint scratching echoed from ahead, then silence. The sound of water dripping off stone. Pipes twisted like metal veins. Shadows danced across the walls, tricking the eye into thinking something moved just out of sight. They walked in silence, only hand signs between them now. No noise. No mistakes. Here, Hall whispered after scanning the wall. Footprints. Bare. Recent. Kara crouched and touched the damp ground. Caleb frowned. Why aren't they leaving trails of blood or rot anymore? Because, Mira signed, they're evolving. Quiet. Clean. Controlled. 2 hours in, the tunnel opened into a vast underground facility, an abandoned government lab lost during the collapse. The walls were marked with strange symbols, circles within circles, scratched in by claw or tool. Torres examined the writing. What is this? Hall replied quietly, not human. Inside, rows of old containment pods lined the walls, most broken, but some intact. And in one of them, Danny. Eyes closed. Breathing steady. Surrounded by wires. Kara approached slowly, gun lowered. What are they doing to him? Hall accessed a nearby console. A flickering screen came to life, revealing test logs and video footage. What they saw turned Kara's stomach. The Prime, weeks ago, strapped to a table. Scientists studying its regenerative abilities. Injecting human DNA. Cross-testing with cloned cells. Until, the experiment broke loose and infected the very lab they stood in. This place is where it all began, Caleb said, backing away from the console. Torres pointed at the glass pod. He's transmitting something. He's connected to the one mind, Mira signed. He's the bridge. Before they could respond, sirens flared. The pod hissed open. Danny opened his eyes, but they were not his anymore. The walls shook as dozens of evolved infected burst from hidden passages, faster than before, more intelligent, coordinated. The team took defensive positions. "Fall back!" Kara shouted. But Danny stood in their path, whispering words that were not human. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Torres aimed and fired, once, straight into Danny's chest. But the boy didn't fall. Instead, he smiled. "You've only awakened the next evolution." A massive roar echoed from the deepest corridor. Mira grabbed Kara's arm. "It's here." From the shadows emerged a new creature, a hybrid. Tall. Armored flesh. Glowing veins. The One Mind's new form, a perfect blend of human intelligence and zombie resilience. The final phase. It attacked without hesitation. Torres and Caleb fired in unison while Mira launched an improvised incendiary. Hall scrambled to the backup console. "I can overload the core," he shouted. "This whole lab, it's sitting on an unstable power source. A meltdown could destroy the entire nest." "Do it," Kara ordered. The fight became a blur of fire, blood, and screams. The hybrid roared, swinging chunks of steel. Caleb was struck and thrown into the wall. Mira pulled him back, wounded but alive. Hall's hands moved over the console in a frenzy. 1 minute until detonation. Torres grabbed 2 grenades and turned to Kara. "Buy them time." Before Kara could stop him, he charged into the swarm, pin-pulling both grenades and taking a group of infected down in a fiery sacrifice. "Torres!" Mira screamed, no signs, just pure emotion. Kara gritted her teeth, dragging Hall, Mira, and a half-conscious Caleb toward the exit. They ran. The tunnels collapsed behind them. Heat surged like the breath of a dragon. Dust choked the air. Then, the ground above them split. A final explosion swallowed the facility whole. It was dawn by the time Kara opened her eyes, covered in ash and lying in the forest. Mira was beside her, helping Caleb sit up. Hall limped from behind a tree, one arm broken but alive. The lab was gone. The tunnels were sealed. And with them, the One Mind. They had done it. Of the 50 who began this journey, only 4 walked away. But they didn't cry. They didn't scream. They stood, because the world hadn't ended. Not yet. Kara looked at the rising sun and said softly, "We survived collapse. We built resistance. And now, we begin again." The Undead War wasn't over. But for now, humanity had won a breath of peace. End of Part 8, series complete.